So we had started with our lectures on Greek philosophy, early Greek philosophy. We had just about introduced the concept of arche. We would be going further with yet the other concept of Greek philosophy, which is Apeiron. This is Dr. Ananya Barua, Associate Professor, Department of Philosophy, Hindu College. Apeiron. The term Apeiron was introduced by Anaximander. Anaximander, as we had discussed in our preceding lecture, has been an early Greek philosopher sometime between 610 to 546 BCE, and Apeiron for Anaximander means infinite, boundless or limitless. Now, Anaximander's idea of Apeiron is that he had rejected his predecessor Thales' idea that water was the arche, because water itself is limited. So instead, Anaximander argued that the first principle must be something eternal, unlimited and indeterminate. Apeiron is the source of all things and contains opposites: hot, cold, wet, dry. So when things separate from the Apeiron, they form the world as we know it. Which means that for Anaximander, Apeiron is the first super source and it is limitless, unlike the other elements like water. So if we check the PPT here, we see that the difference between Arche and Apeiron has been listed below. First, the definition. Now, the arche, if the first principle or fundamental substance of reality, Apeiron, on the other hand, is the infinite, boundless source from which everything originates. Now, the other feature is about nature, where about arche it is often a specific element: water, air, fire, atoms. On the other hand, Apeiron is indeterminate. It is not a specific substance. The other feature or the difference between Arche and Apeiron is it was proposed, Arche was proposed by Thales, Anaximenes, Heraclitus, Empedocles, Anaxagoras, Democritus and the other EGP thinkers. However, Apeiron had been proposed by Anaximander. Now, if we are to talk about the properties of arche, we see that it is tangible, definite and observable in nature. Apeiron, on the other hand, is intangible, infinite and beyond human perception. Now, the feature of the cause of change of arche is that the elements transform into one another. Apeiron, however, contains all opposites which separate over time. So, with this very clear distinction or classification between arche and Apeiron, this much is crystal clear, which is arche is the fundamental principle of reality which different philosophers identified with different elements: water, air, fire, earth, atoms, mind. On the other hand, Apeiron, introduced by Anaximander, is a limitless, indeterminate principle that generates everything, but is itself beyond human perceptions. So we see that the debate between a specific arche like water or fire and an indeterminate principle, Apeiron, sets the stage for later philosophical inquiries into the nature of existence, change and the universe. Thus, a deeper analysis of Arche and Apeiron makes us realize that the search for the first principle, arche, was one of the earliest philosophical inquiries in ancient Greece. To truly grasp the depth of these concepts, we must not forget also to explore the philosophical motivation behind arche, the evolution from mythos to logos, Anaximander's Apeiron as a radical shift, comparative analysis of different arches, the metaphysical implications of Arche and Apeiron. And in fact, this could be some of the possible research topics for our interdisciplinary students who are now a part of the NAP syllabus. Now, the first one first, the philosophical motivation behind Arche. So what could be the motivation to come up to a concept like Arche? So the question here is, why did the early Greek philosophers seek a fundamental principle behind everything? So we see that the rejection of mythological explanations is one of them. Before philosophy, the Greeks explained nature through myths and gods. You know, we all are accustomed to Hesiod and Homer, and the pre-Socratics moved from mythos or myth to logos or reason. The other reason is that the desire for a unified explanation. They observed change, diversity, and movement in the natural world and sought a single cause behind it. Third, influence of Egyptian and Babylonian thought. The Greeks interacted with Egyptian and Babylonian civilizations, which had cosmological theories, inspiring them to ask similar questions. And this is interesting, and this is why the early Greek philosophers are also called as cosmologists. Cosmologists means those who believed in the existence of cosmos or arche. So cosmos, as much as it implies nature, but there is a subtle difference between being a naturalist and being a cosmologist. Cosmologists mostly connects the concept of arche. Naturalists, on the other hand, they made nature as their landscape for philosophical experimentation and laboratory work. Now, the second reason behind the concept of arche is, as I had mentioned, the evolution from mythos to logos. Greek philosophy marked a transition from mythological explanations to rational inquiry. And we see that the mythological view was there very much significant before the first thinkers, before Thales, before philosophy. So the Homeric and Hesiodic worldview explained natural events as acts of God, as we are all quite familiar with Zeus, who controls lightning, and so on and so forth. Or as of that matter, there is this talk about chaos or titans and Olympian gods who were seen as the ultimate forces behind reality. So this narrative of the mythological influence was cross-checked. I mean, there were lots of check and balance there. And that's when the philosophical view or the pre-Socratic era started. So philosophers rejected all these divine explanations and instead sought a universal principle, arche, with reasoning. They used observation, reason, and logical arguments instead of divine myths. This transition is best illustrated by Thales, Anaximander, and Anaximenes. And if I can add a footnote here, Thales, Anaximander, and Anaximenes have been the student of the other. So Thales can be the super teacher, Anaximander, the disciple of Thales, and Anaximenes, the disciple of Anaximander. Further, we see Anaximander's Apeiron has been a radical shift, the real reason why the entire concept of arche or Apeiron crops up. So the question thus is, why then did Anaximander reject Thales' arche? Thales, again 624 to 546 BCE, proposed water or hydra as the first principle. However, Anaximander found a problem with this idea. If everything comes from water, then how do opposites exist? Fire, for example, is opposite to water. How can water give rise to fire? So Anaximander comes up with a solution, and he replaces Arche with Apeiron, the boundless. Anaximander 610 to 546 BC proposed a more abstract principle than water. So he comes up with the concept of Apeiron, which for him is infinite, indefinite, and eternal. It contains all opposites, hot, cold, wet, dry, in a potential state. It is not any specific substance, but rather the source of all substances. Now, Anaximander's Apeiron has been a radical shift. So, how does Apeiron work? Everything emerges from the Apeiron through separation of opposites. The universe is in a constant process of creation and destruction. The Apeiron is eternal and governs everything by necessity. This was one of the first attempts at an abstract, non-material principle of reality. Now, if we are to check the PPT displayed here, we see that the different philosophers had proposed different first principles, Arche, and each had its strength and weaknesses. Thales, Arche was water, and a key idea has been that everything is made of water. The strength has been that it explains life's dependence on water. Weakness, it doesn't explain fire or dry substances. Anaximander, Apeiron, the infinite. The key idea has been that the first principle is indeterminate and eternal. Strength, it accounts for opposites and infinity. Weaknesses, it is too abstract and it doesn't define the substance. Anaximenes, Arche, air, the key idea has been that everything is condensed or expanded air. Strength, it's more observable than Apeiron. Weakness, hard to explain non-gaseous matter. Heraclitus, fire, key idea, everything is in constant flux. Strength captures the idea of change and transformation. Weaknesses, doesn't explain stability. Parmenides, being, key idea, change is an illusion, reality is one. Strength, it introduces metaphysical speculation. Weaknesses, contradicts common sense observation. Empedocles proposed Arche, which is the four elements. The key idea has been that everything is a mix of earth, water, air, and fire. Strength is the first pluralist approach, and weaknesses, it doesn't explain what combines the elements. Anaxagoras proposed mind as the Arche. The key idea, it is a cosmic intelligence that governs everything. Strength introduces purpose and design. Weaknesses, it is hard to prove nous exists. Leucippus and Democritus, he proposed Arche as atoms. Key idea, tiny indivisible particles that make up everything. Strengths, scientific approach that predicts modern physics. Weaknesses, lacks explanation for motion and forces. So we see that each philosopher did build upon or reacted against the others, refining the idea of the Arche. Now, the yet other concept has been the metaphysical implications of Arche and Apeiron. The concept of Arche has deep metaphysical significance. For when we talk about Arche being metaphysically important, we are somehow hinting to the abstract first principles, and these brings us to the distinction between materiality versus abstract first principles. Early thinkers like Thales, Anaximenes, and Heraclitus proposed a material substance as the Arche. Anaximander's Apeiron was abstract and infinite, influencing later metaphysics. The problem of change and permanence, as we had seen in Heraclitus, for whom change is the only constant. Parmenides, who talks about change is an illusion, reality is one. So this debate between static and becoming influenced Plato and Aristotle. The unity of opposites, Anaximander's Apeiron, contained opposites within itself. Heraclitus believed that opposites were constantly in struggle and transformation. Scientific and theological impact, we see that the concept of Apeiron as an infinite, boundless source resembles later ideas of God or the absolute in metaphysics. The search for a single principle influenced scientific reductionism, which again is akin to physics theory of everything. So then, what is it that we are discussing so far? We see that the search for the first principle, Arche, was a groundbreaking philosophical endeavor. Thales had initiated the idea of a material arche, water. Anaximander's Apeiron introduced an abstract, infinite first principle. Later philosophers refined these ideas, leading to pluralism, atomism, and metaphysics. Thus, the debate over change versus permanence, material versus abstract principles, and the unity of opposites shaped the foundations of Western philosophy and science. So then, why are the Greek philosophers called Milesian thinkers? We come back to our first question. So we see that the first group of Greek philosophers, Thales, Anaximander and Anaximenes, are known as the Milesian thinkers because they all came from the city of Miletus, an ancient Greek city on the coast of Ionia, which is the modern day Turkey. They are also thus called as Milesian thinkers or Ionic philosophers. So it is one and the same thing, Ionia in Miletus. So they have various names: early Greek philosophers, pre-Socratic thinkers, Ionians or Ionic thinkers, and definitely the Milesian thinkers. So we see that all of these thinkers who were clubbed under this umbrella term of Milesian or Ionic or pre-Socratic or early Greek thinkers did have a profound understanding of the cosmos through natural principles and not mythology. And they all had been identifying a fundamental substance, Arche, as the origin of everything, explaining natural phenomena using observation and reason. So these thinkers did lay the foundation of Western philosophy and science by moving away from mythological explanations and towards rational inquiry. So quickly, we did discuss the one cosmological or the cosmologists' approach, the explorers of the universe. The Milesians were thus the first cosmologists because they sought to explain the origin, structure, and order of the universe. Before them, myths or mythology existed, and they had rejected that. So Milesians rejected not only just myths or mythological explanation, but anything which had an element of supernatural causes and looked for natural laws, scientific explanation that governs the universe. Thus, they had asked that what is the fundamental substance, Arche, that comes from? And we have already explained about the various modules, and we do see that there has been an impact on later thought. Their cosmological thinking influenced later astronomers like Ptolemy and Copernicus. Their search for natural causes inspired modern physics and cosmology, and this materialistic outlook also influenced atomists like Leucippus, Democritus, who argued that everything is made of atoms. It further influenced modern scientific materialism, where reality is explained through matter and energy. And we had also discussed that for these very reasons, they are also called as raw scientists. Now, the last but not the least feature of the early Greek philosophers slash Milesian slash Ionic slash pre-Socratic thinkers is that they are mechanists. Now, what is mechanists, or who are mechanists? Mechanists are those that explains nature without gods. So the Milesians rejected divine intervention and sought mechanical explanations for natural phenomena. Thales explained earthquakes as caused by movements in water, not for some body's wrath. Anaximenes explained wind and rain through the condensation and expansion of air. Anaximander proposed that the earth floats freely in space rather than being supported by gods. So they paved the way for natural science by rejecting myths and searching for mechanical causes, and this inspired Newtonian physics, where forces like gravity replaced divine explanations. As mentioned, they also had been the raw scientists, for they were raw or proto-scientists because they used observation, which was to studying nature directly, generalization, where it was to finding patterns and principles, rational principles, or analysis, where using reason instead of myths. So we see that the early Greek philosophers were lastly also the empiricists in their own right, where unlike pure abstract thinkers, the Milesians relied on sensory observation to understand nature. Thales studied water and its transformations. Anaximenes observed how air could be compressed into different forms. Anaximander studied fossils and suggested that life emerged from water. So the Milesians thus were naturalists, for they treated nature as an independent system governed by its own rules rather than by gods. They saw the universe as a self-regulating entity with natural laws. They did not attribute natural events to the will of the gods, but to physical principles. So they believed that everything in the universe is interconnected. For example, Thales did mention that water connects everything because it exists in solid, liquid and gaseous form. Anaximenes said that air is the fundamental force present in all living and non-living things. Anaximander that the Apeiron contains everything in a potential state from which all things emerge. And we see that the impacts on later thought, that this holistic view influenced later philosophers like Heraclitus and Plato. So all Milesian thinkers were concerned with finding the arche, the fundamental principle from which all things originate, and they have been in their own right cosmologists, materialists, mechanists, empiricists, raw scientists, interconnectionism. These ideas set the foundation for later philosophy and modern science, making the Milesian school the birthplace of Western rational thought. Thank you so much. We will be continuing more of the Greek philosophers in our next class. For today, this much. Thank you.